Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining. Our program will begin shortly. Good day, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Hello, and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, Israel at War, a series featuring programs surrounding the evolving situation in Israel and Gaza, understanding its impact around the world, and sharing action items you can take from wherever you are. Amidst the ongoing war in Gaza, where Hamas has refused to release the 133 hostages for over 6 months, and Israel remains committed to eradicating the terrorist threat following the mass murder and atrocities of October 7, the humanitarian toll on Gaza's civilian population has become the focal point of global concern. Joining us today, momentarily, to discuss the unfolding situation is Ambassador David Satterfield, U.S. Special Envoy for Middle East Humanitarian Issues. Moderating today's conversation is AJC Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer, Jason Isaacson. Jason, before I turn it over to you, I want to let everybody know that after we hear from our guests and time permitting, we will take your questions. You can email your questions to questions@ajc.org. That's questions plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Daniel, thank you very much. So I just spoke with Ambassador David Satterfield, who is in Israel doing the work to which he was appointed by President Biden on October 15th of last year as U.S. Special Envoy for Middle East Humanitarian Issues. He was pulled into an emergency situation just moments ago. He said he'll be right on the call. And I told him we will begin the conversation just as soon as he gets on. But in the meantime, let's save a little time. I'll introduce him, even though he is not yet on your screen. But I know that David Satterfield will be with us shortly. And I want to start out by thanking him for taking the time again to speak with AJC about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, interrupting his evening in Israel to brief us and respond to our questions. For some AJC viewers, this will be a repeat privilege after private meetings that we've been fortunate to have with the ambassador, both in Tel Aviv and virtually, since his appointment by President Biden on October 15th of last year. As Special Envoy for Middle East Humanitarian Issues, Ambassador Satterfield is the point person for the U.S. government on the humanitarian aid situation in Gaza. By way of further introduction of this highly respected diplomat, I'll simply say that David Satterfield is and has been throughout his 40-year-plus career in the U.S. Foreign Service at the head of the class of U.S. Middle East experts, with senior postings across the region and in policy roles at the State Department and in the White House, and not just in the Middle East. His last postings were as the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, and then for a number of months as the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa. Since July of 2022, Ambassador Satterfield has managed to carry out diplomatic assignments while serving as director of Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Affairs in Houston. He has tried to retire from the Foreign Service, but he is so good and so highly valued by Washington that, frankly, the department, Secretary Blinken and President Biden haven't let him do that. In our last conversation with Ambassador Satterfield, which was just last month, a Board of Governors coffee break, he offered his assessment of the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the capabilities that Israel, the United States, and other countries and institutions, including United Nations agencies, could bring to bear to alleviate conditions there. We will continue and substantially update that conversation today when Ambassador Satterfield joins us. I should say also, before we begin, as we wait for Ambassador Satterfield to come on this call, that I am speaking to you from Rome, where the AJC Transatlantic Institute is holding a series of meetings with government officials, civil society partners, with the Jewish community. We met today with the national coordinator for Italy on the fight against anti-Semitism. We spent time with leaders of the Jewish community, including Jewish students as well. We spent some time with members of the National Assembly of Italy, the National Parliament. and with the American ambassador to Italy today for lunch, and the Israeli ambassador to Italy yesterday. The meetings that we're having here in Rome follow a series of meetings that AJC Executive Council members had last week in Israel on the third solidarity mission that AJC has taken to Israel since the massacres of October 7th. In Israel, we met with a range of senior government officials. We went down to the southern part of the country to look at the border crossing between Israel and Egypt, where aid trucks are flowing through to reach Gaza. We also spent time at the Nova Music Festival site, which has turned into a really searing memorial for the hundreds of mostly young people who were slaughtered or taken captive on that dark day of October 7th last year. We also spent time at Kibbutz Be'eri, a kibbutz that was decimated in the massacre of October 7th. AJC also met with Ambassador Jacob Lew, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, and heard from him about the decision that the United States made just days before we were there to abstain from a UN Security Council resolution regarding the Israel-Hamas war, a resolution that, as you'll recall, did not include the same degree of linkage that we have come to expect, and that appeared in the previous week's American sponsored resolution of the Security Council, the linkage of the possibility of a temporary ceasefire in Gaza with the release of the hostages being held by Hamas. It was explained to us that this was not a reflection of a change of U.S. policy, that the U.S. policy is consistent. And in fact, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield's explanation of vote after that Security Council abstention made it clear that the U.S. policy has not changed. And now I am so pleased that Ambassador Satterfield is able to join us from Israel. David, thank you for interrupting your evening, coming away from the crisis that you were just handling to spend time with the American Jewish Committee.
More than happy to, Jason.
So let's plunge right in. Before we focus, though, on the humanitarian situation, which, of course, continues to dominate the headlines, I wonder if I could get your take on the widespread accounts of a growing rift between the United States and Israel on the conduct of the war, a war that began with the invasion of Israel by thousands of Hamas terrorists on October 7th, who killed and brutalized more than 1,200 women, men, children, and babies, and kidnapped and dragged back to Gaza more than 250 people, more than half of whom are still held hostage 6 months later. Does the U.S. continue to support Israel's war aims? Some of the latest reporting suggests otherwise.
Jason, let me go back to the visit by President Biden, October 18, 19, to Israel. When the president came, he had two messages for the prime minister, for the war cabinet, for the people of Israel. The first message was powerful and valid then, and it remains powerful and valid now. The president has Israel's back. The president supports the objective of this campaign, complex, difficult as it is, to ensure that Hamas, this terrorist group, is never in a position to threaten Israel again, as it did on October 7th, that Hamas is not in a position either to govern the Palestinians of Gaza or to deny governance to anyone else. It is essential that these goals be achieved. The United States support for them is ironclad. That was our position in that first week after the horrible, horrific, bestial massacres of October 7th, and it remains our position today. But the president had another message at that same moment, which is this campaign is going to be complex, it's going to be difficult, and it will require time, and it will require political space and support. And that political space and support, most importantly, comes from the United States, also important from others in the international community, but it's existential that it be preserved in the United States. And the president made clear, in order for me to be able to keep that space open, to give you the time you need, you have got to be as assiduous, as focused, as committed on the humanitarian side as you are on the kinetic side. First, because it's right. It is the proper thing for democracies to do. Secondly, it is strategically critical. You need, I say the words again, time and space. The humanitarian element of this campaign is absolutely essential, intrinsic to what you're going to need to do. Now, the kinetic campaign has been complex. It's been more complex, I think, than anyone in Israel or the United States anticipated. The magnitude of Hamas's terrorist army, terrorist military, not just a gang or a group, exceeded expectations. The tunnel network, the hundreds of kilometers of tunnels underground, that also was beyond any expectation. U.S. has never fought, Jason, a campaign like this, nor has Israel, nor has any other modern army. And it is slow going. It's hard. Hamas had 16 years, 17 years to embed itself within humanitarian civilian structures, to use in a fashion which is beyond callous the innocent people of Gaza as their shields, about which they care nothing except in an instrumentalized fashion to sustain their own ability to project influence and authority. This is hard, really hard to do. We understand that profoundly. It'd be hard for us, and it's going to take time. But the humanitarian element has lagged. Not enough has been done, and much, much more is required here. There is an imminent risk of starvation for the majority, if not all, the 2.2 million population of Gaza. This is not a point in debate. It is an established fact which the United States, its experts, the international community, its experts, assess and believe is real. The ability to avert that challenge for that population, that innocent population, depends on a dramatic increase in the volume of humanitarian assistance that is distributed into and within Gaza. Now, there are two metrics here, Jason, and it's important to distinguish between them. One is the volume of trucks delivering aid into Gaza, that is, into warehouses, into storage yards inside Gaza. Now, that volume, after the president's call with Prime Minister Netanyahu last Friday, has dramatically increased. It's gone from an average of around 200 trucks a day to, over the last 3 days, beyond 400 trucks a day to the center and to the south. But the north, where starvation, the risk, and we believe the reality is far greater, needs at least 100 trucks a day. Those are the commitments the prime minister made to the president. We don't have that number in the north yet. And we are working as fast as we can, as hard as we can, with our Israeli colleagues, with the international community, to see that assistance delivered. Now, look at what happened last week, the tragedy of the World Central Kitchen deaths. That is, as Israeli government officials, as the president, as the Secretary of State has said, a tragedy and beyond. It shows how much has failed and how much needs to be done, and done immediately, to change the picture on the humanitarian side. Things like this must not happen again. And to ensure they don't happen again, a variety of steps were committed by the Prime Minister, the President, to be taken. Opening new crossings in the north, that's being worked right now. Moving that 100 truck a day delivery of assistance into the north, we're about halfway there, but that means we're halfway not there, and progress has to be made. It means maximizing the delivery and the facilitation of distribution within Gaza of humanitarian assistance to the bulk of the population, maybe 1.8, 1.9 million, who live in the center and the south. That's underway right now. There are logistical steps which the UN and the humanitarian community need to take in terms of bringing in more trucks so they can maximize their delivery now that the volume of aid has gone up as much as it is. But we need Israel to undertake every possible effort to facilitate the ability of the humanitarian actors to move assistance within Gaza and from the south to the north, not just bringing it in from outside to the north, but moving it up from the south. All these issues, Jason, are underway right now. Ashdod port needs to be opened for humanitarian deliveries beyond just flour. That decision was made by the prime minister, was confirmed by the cabinet. We're working now to see how quickly Ashdod can be made a recipient point for that assistance. Jordan plays a critical role now in moving international humanitarian assistance directly from Jordan and inspection there across the bridge and straight into Gaza. Right now, that movement is taking place. Some 100 Jordanian Armed Forces trucks have moved already. It is moving through Kerem Shalom. We anticipate it moving within the very near future, directly into Gaza through the new northern crossing. And then we have our own maritime corridor, which our colleagues in the US military, in DOD, have been working on, and which we anticipate will reach an operational capacity well before the end of the month. Jordanian Channel, new crossing into the north, maritime corridor, maximizing the inspection procedures at Nitzana and Kerem Shalom. All of this is going to be able to bring the assistance to the people of Gaza that should have been coming months back. And now it must come to avert a reality in Gaza which is so disastrous for us, for Israel, for the image of Israel, and frankly, the United States, that every possible step has to be taken to avert it. Now, all of this, Jason, pivots me back to your question. Is there a rift? No, Jason, there's not. The United States is as firmly supportive, the president is as firmly supportive of Israel, of those objectives of making Hamas unable to govern, unable to threaten Israel, as it was when the horrific events of October 7th occurred, when the president made his first visit. But friends can talk frankly to friends, and much more needed to be done. The WCK deaths brought that into stark, unmistakable relief last week. The president moved promptly with the prime minister to lay out the details of what had to happen. As a practical reality, our ability to sustain, my words again, time and space for this campaign, for the objectives to be reached, absolutely depends now, as a practical matter, on how Israel acts on the humanitarian side and with regard to the conduct of the campaign.
David, thank you for that extremely comprehensive answer. It raises a few questions in my mind. Is it unusual, or is this normal for a country that has been attacked, anything along the scale of what Israel suffered on October 7th, to then be responsible for the provision of humanitarian assistance for the territory that launched that attack, or that hosted the launchers of that attack? How responsible is Israel in a legal sense, in a moral sense, for the welfare of that population? I think there's some questions that are being raised about that.
Jason, Israel, just like the United States in Iraq, has both a moral and a legal, under international humanitarian law, responsibility. The horrific dehumanization of Israelis that took place on October 7th, the ongoing dehumanization of the Israeli hostages every day they're held, cannot be matched by dehumanization of innocent Palestinian civilians. When we operated under complex circumstances in Iraq against ISIS, we had to take responsibility for the humanitarian situation in areas where the real fundamental existential threat to our forces, to Iraqi forces, and civilians existed. It's an obligation. Now, Gaza is complex because people can't leave, and we don't want them to leave. The future of Gazans is in Gaza, not somewhere else. So they need to stay there, but they need to stay while this campaign goes on in a manner that meets their fundamental humanitarian needs. And yes, Jason, there is a responsibility that is moral, which is special to countries, democracies like us, like Israel, and that is binding on all countries around the world. From an international humanitarian law standpoint, to do everything possible to preserve innocent civilian lives from collateral damage and to meet basic humanitarian needs during a campaign.
Now, you pointed out that, and you pointed this out also the last time we spoke a month or so ago, that Israel has picked up substantially the number of trucks that have gone into Gaza delivering aid, and you just told us about the really significant increase, just frankly, since the president's conversation with the prime minister. When the food and water and medicine and fuel crosses into Gaza, why is it Israel's responsibility to distribute it? Are there not UN agencies that have the capability and in some ways the responsibility to assist the
Jason,
civilian population?
It's not Israel's responsibility to distribute. Indeed, that's the responsibility of the international humanitarian community. It is Israel's absolute responsibility, in bright letters, to facilitate in every way possible the activities of the international humanitarian community to distribute assistance. That's Israel's responsibility. It does not, it cannot end at the moment the assistance physically enters Gaza, because Israel is effectively the controlling power in Gaza, and with it comes obligations.
Even though Israel left Gaza in 2005.
Jason, this is a practical matter.
They're there now. Yeah, right.
It is a practical matter. Israel has a responsibility.
Thank you, David. About the World Central Kitchen horrific tragedy of last week. Israel took immediate responsibility. Accountability included the dismissal of 2 senior officers, serious reprimands of 3 other commanders. I think Israel is changing some of its policies regarding such targeting. There has been a pause now, I believe, in the provision of aid by certain humanitarian organizations and nations. I think the United Arab Emirates, for instance, is pausing its delivery of aid. What are the ramifications of that interruption, and how long do you expect it to last?
Jason, our dialogue with the government of Israel, with the IDF, Israel's own dialogue with countries like the UAE, is conditioned on being able to show in a concrete, in a demonstrable fashion, that lessons have been learned, not just from the WCK tragedy, but from the period of time before that, when there was continuous urging of Israel to undertake measures that did facilitate the delivery of assistance from everyone, not just the UN, not just major INGOs, international NGOs, but from other countries. It is now imperative that Israel demonstrate in every way on the ground that things have changed, that the way checkpoints operate, that the way the IDF conducts itself with respect to international humanitarian actors has changed. Look, Jason, we know, we respect, we acknowledge the extraordinary threat that the soldiers of the IDF are exposed to in Gaza. This is a difficult, hard campaign against a vicious, brutal terrorist force. The threats are not imaginary. They are real. They're real every single day. We know that. The IDF needs to protect itself. Our soldiers would protect themselves. But the manner in which they engage in their contact, in their work, in their facilitation of the movements and activities of humanitarian actors must be done in a fashion which supports, encourages, facilitates those actors' ability to do what Israel itself requires, getting aid to all the people of Gaza. It needs to be done in an appropriate fashion. It needs to be done in a way that acknowledges Israeli security concerns, but also acknowledges the need for Israel and its strategic purposes to get that assistance moving. If Israel does this, and this is what our dialogue has focused on since the president's call last Friday, if Israel shows this, and it is making progress, then you will see, I believe, the actors that you mentioned coming back.
David, I know that there's been a lot of expectation of, or anticipation rather, of Israel moving into Rafah in a major way to eliminate the last 4 battalions that Hamas has operating there. A very real prospect that there are a number of hostages that are being held there, along with leadership of Hamas. What is the humanitarian situation in Rafah? How do you see that evolving in the light of this expectation that Israel, which has just announced again that it intends to move into Rafah, do you see that happening anytime soon? Will people be moved out of the way? And how will that affect the 1.1 or 2 or 1.5 million Palestinians who are in that city?
Jason, I'll start with the first question you posed. What's the situation, humanitarian situation in Rafah? With the exception of North Gaza, where because of isolation, very little, relatively little provision until fairly recently of assistance coming in, we believe the incidence of serious famine, of genuine starvation is greater. With the exception of North Gaza, which has a population possibly of 300,000, nobody knows for sure, Rafah presents the most difficult, challenging humanitarian picture right now of anywhere in Gaza. Recall the situation of 1.4 million of the total 1.8 or 1.9 displaced to South and Central Gaza were concentrated in Rafah. The ability to provide basic sanitation is non-existent. International workers have never seen sanitation situations as in Rafah, never anywhere in their experience in the world. The ability to do more than survival level feeding. What do I mean by that? I mean simply averting starvation, not preventing malnutrition, not preventing clinical, demonstrable wasting, and not preventing infant, young child mortality and morbidity is extraordinarily limited. Just because we are averting famine by the collective aid efforts moving in doesn't mean we're preventing those other problems, malnutrition, wasting, mortality in infants and young children, from taking place. They are. Rafah is a miserable place to be from any health-related, shelter-related standpoint. If you displace those already displaced persons in their state right now of hunger, want, lack of basic medical services, yet again, without all appropriate measures being taken to provide suitable shelter in advance, to provide the medical care, the water, the feeding that they will need. They need it right now in Rafah and can't get it. If you move them yet again, we believe the circumstances will be disastrous. And that is why the president has made clear that there must be a credible, implemented humanitarian plan for the population of Rafah before any Israeli operation can take place with U.S. support. And I really can't be clearer in that messaging. As to the timing, Israeli intentions, those are questions best addressed to the government of Israel. But we've made our position clear. You gotta have a credible humanitarian plan before there is any operation in Rafah that we will be able to support.
And yet, do I understand correctly that there is an agreement between the United States and Israel on the necessity of defeating Hamas leadership that is in Rafah?
There is an agreement that Hamas must not be able, as a product of this campaign, to challenge, to threaten Israel again as it did on October 7th. There is absolute agreement, as there has been since October 7th, that Hamas must not be in a position to govern or to deny governance in Gaza to others. But we believe there are other ways to address those battalions in Rafah than a comprehensive ground maneuver campaign.
And that's being discussed right now between Israel and the United States.
Jason, we have had intense and continuing discussions with the government of Israel, both on those alternative campaign measures, which I will not go into on this conversation. But I would say there is also agreement now that no Rafah operation can take place without a credible, coherent humanitarian plan for the population of innocent Gazans residing there. And your next question to me will be, is there such a plan? Jason, we need to see a credible, implementable plan. If any form of operation in Rafah, beyond the sorts of measures we are discussing now, military to military, is to take place. That is something yet to be shown, yet to be concretized in terms of acknowledgement of credible, comprehensive, and adequate.
Thank you, David. I do know that there are ongoing consultations, and it's good to hear that as well. Let me broaden this a little bit beyond the situation in Gaza, in southern Gaza, to the threats that Israel faces generally in the north from proxies from Iran itself, perhaps in reaction to last week's strike in Damascus, which was so effectively eliminating part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps leadership. It has been talked about in Washington, on Capitol Hill a little bit. There have been hints that maybe there might be some conditioning of military aid to Israel in light of what's going on in Gaza and the conduct of the war and the humanitarian situation. Is conditioning military aid to our ally within the realm of possibility?
Jason, our assistance and our support for Israel is absolute. Israel knows it, and Iran knows it as well. And I'm not going to comment on the endless churn of speculation and chatter regarding what is or is not the case. Israel knows our support is firm. Iran knows it as well.
I think at this point, we should open it to questions from viewers of this conversation. David, you've been extremely generous with your time, and I thank you very much as now and as always. Daniel, are there questions from the audience?
Yes, Jason, thank you, and thank you, Ambassador. Our first question from Larissa Wagner and from Stan Kidwell. Ambassador Satterfield, you mentioned that there's no real debate about Gazans starving. I've seen lots of analysts say otherwise, and the numbers are not statistically possible according to several analysts. And the Israeli government does not seem to agree. How do we reconcile these differences?
It's not a question of reconciling. We are making, on behalf of the United States government and our own experts within the government, as well as our consultations with those outside government and our partners in the international community, there is no debate regarding the magnitude of the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Full stop.
David, oh yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Daniel, there's one other question that I wanted to pose before we go back into viewer questions. We've been talking for 40 minutes about aid being delivered to Gaza, and frankly, for the years that Hamas has been in power in Gaza, and diverting funds that otherwise could go to the welfare of the population to building military infrastructure. There has been this constant drumbeat of or rather constant references to the fact that Gaza is reliant on outside aid. Will Gaza always be reliant on outside assistance? Is there a possibility in the future of self-reliance for the civilian population there?
Sure. Jason, we could take this discussion back to 2005 when Aric Sharon took his decision on unilateral withdrawal. Our counsel at the time was, you're not going to have a happy result unless you do the opposite of what you're proposing. What he proposed was a siege, an isolation of Gaza. It was on its own. We said, no, that's not going to lead to results that you really want. What you need to do is the opposite. You need to open Gaza to the maximum extent possible, to bind it, to tie it into international, regional, and Israeli economics and society, provide an alternate vision, provide something other than what comes with desperation. That was not the decision taken in 2005. Other decisions were modified and taken in terms of worker permits, access for fishing, and other steps. But you're asking about now, not 17, 18 years ago. Now, Israel's vision, I think the region's vision, certainly our vision for Gaza, is not one of isolation. It is to be able to reach a day after in which there is a potent alternate social, economic, and political vision for the people of Gaza. Look, you can kill fighters, absolutely. Take them off the battlefield. You can't, and I'll give a quote many of you have heard many times. You can't kill an idea except with another idea. And that has been too lacking in Gaza for too long. A potent, credible, real, other idea, other vision, other horizon.
Thank you, David. Daniel?
We have lots of questions that have come in about Hamas's role here, and I'll give you a few of them, but just your general thoughts. So is Hamas cooperating or getting in the way of distribution of aid? How much is Hamas allowing the aid to the people, or are they keeping it on their own? What role does Hamas play in making sure that they're receiving food and water? Many questions like that. So curious, Ambassador, as to your general thoughts there.
The volume of international assistance that has been provided since October 21 has been, in its largest part, received by the people, the civilians of Gaza. At a level of accountability, the aid distributed by the UN, as opposed to Palestinian Red Crescent or other organizations, has been much more accountable. Can we say with absolute certainty that Hamas has not, in fashion direct or indirect, been able to use the assistance deliveries for its own purposes, including simply enhancement of authority? No, we can't say that. What we can say is this: the population of Gaza, 2.2 million people, are not in total starving today, because the bulk of the assistance delivered has gone to them, not to Hamas. And that's the fundamental fact.
Thank you. Next question, also regarding distribution, from Frank Lindy. Ambassador, can you please speak a bit more about the distribution challenges and how they're being addressed? What's being done to put pressure on these international organizations to ramp up those efforts?
The single biggest limiter to the ability of the international community to deliver assistance right now, as opposed to in months past during the time of kinetic operations, is the deficit of trucks in Gaza to take the enhanced volume of assistance and distribute it. Look, it's one thing, as I believe I said earlier to Jason, to bring assistance into Gaza, but that doesn't get it to people. You need a very large truck network to move the aid to distribution points that get it to the population. Now, the international community had trucks adequate to that task when the volume of assistance was very limited. They do not now. So we are exerting with the UN, working with the government of Israel, the IDF, to locate, to mobilize as many trucks as possible to get into Gaza as quickly as possible so that distribution can take place. This is not really an Israeli limiter at this point. It's a logistics limiter on the international community. Do they understand the need? Yeah, absolutely they do.
But David, if we're hearing people every day saying Israel has to let in more aid, is that the right call that people are making? It sounds like Israel is letting in tremendously
Jason,
more aid.
I'll be very explicit on this. Today, yesterday, day before, Israel has dramatically enhanced the operation of its inspection points and the ability of aid to come in. 400 plus trucks a day. The north is still a problem. We're still about halfway there to the volume of assistance that needs to move, the PM committed to move into the north. But for the center and south, it's moving. That's the last 72 hours. The 5 months that preceded that did not show an adequate ability by Israel to facilitate, take the implementing and operational steps necessary to get aid in. The need has not suddenly emerged with last week. The need has been there for 5 months. We have worked day after day from 0 to 20 trucks to about 100 trucks a day, then to a complete halt in assistance in January because demonstrators shut down the inspection facilities in Nitzana and Kerem Shalom. In February, Israeli strikes on Palestinian police accompanying the convoys, shut down assistance moves, spurred intense, violent criminal behavior. We've come back from that. But let's not mistake, 3 days of excellent progress has got to continue. And it doesn't make up for 5 months of something very, very different.
Thank you, David. I understand. You also understand the context in Israel that is still traumatized by what happened on October 7th and feels if Hamas releases the hostages, we won't have this issue. But you know that well.
Jason, I've lived here since a week after October 7th for all but a very small number of days back in the United States. Believe me, I understand fundamentally the national societal trauma that October 7th, this massacre of Jews, the greatest since the camps were liberated, what that produced, with every understanding for why. And I know that trauma will not be released until the hostages come out. No question about that at all. But in the midst of this trauma, of this suffering, what Secretary Blinken referred to, and I made reference to again, as the dehumanization of Israelis, it cannot be mirrored by dehumanization of innocent Palestinians.
Thank you, David. Daniel?
Our next question from Betsy Swanson. What is the U.S.'s view of Egypt's role? What's Egypt's responsibility as the other country with a blockade and border with Gaza relative to Israel? How would you rate the success of the facilitation of aid into and within Gaza? And does Egypt have the same humanitarian responsibility as Israel does?
Until very recently, Egypt was essentially the only source for assistance moving into Gaza, whether through Rafah or then through Nitzana, then Kerem Shalom, when it opened, prior to the establishment of the Jordan Channel. Egypt was the place where international assistance, where regional assistance, bilateral assistance all moved. And the Egyptians have done an extraordinary job. Gaza would have suffered infinitely more, unacceptably so, had Egypt not stepped up to the task immediately after October 7th. Egypt still is the principal point from which assistance flows into the inspection facilities inside Israel. It's Egypt that has contributed in the most meaningful sense to the flow of commercial goods into Gaza. We want to see much more come, but Egypt is the primary contributor there to this point. With respect to Egypt and the issue of what you referred to as blockade, we understand the United States government that it is for Egypt, is now, was before October 7th, a fundamental existential premise that Palestinians should remain in Gaza and not be resettled or moved to Egypt. We appreciated it before October 7th as a basic point of national principle. We and Israel appreciate it after October 7th.
David, let me jump in and just ask about the maritime corridor that you mentioned earlier, the pier that is being built that was announced by President Biden in his State of the Union address, that you say will be completed before the end of this month, really on an accelerated basis. What difference will that make in terms of delivery of aid? How much can come in by sea? I'd also point out that I know Cyprus is playing a very important role in all of this.
Sure. Jason, the capacity of the maritime corridor, when at full operation, is going to be able to bring in at least 100 truckloads a day, every day, of assistance. This is a massive quantity of aid. It points out all the more vividly what your previous questioner asked me. Logistical constraints on the part of the international actors. They need more trucks. They need more trucks right now. Without that additional additive volume of aid coming in, they're going to need trucks to manage that as well. The success in getting assistance into Gaza must be paralleled in real time with success in getting a distribution system that logistically is capable of handling the Jordan channel, the maritime channel, the existing channel from Egypt through Nitzana and Kerem Shalom. We're going to get over 500 trucks a day, well over that level. Commercial and HA, humanitarian assistance. You got to be able to distribute efficiently. So the maritime channel will be a major adjunct to the land corridors open now and about to open in the north in the very near future. And if I can, Jason, I'll make an additional point here. The reason for the maritime corridor is simple. It is another way of bringing in assistance. It's not an alternative to the land corridors. It is an adjunct to those corridors. And we can't repeat that point more often. Those land corridors, the ones that are open now, the ones about to open in the north, need to stay open and functional. That would be true with or without the maritime corridor. But thanks to the support from DOD, our military, we've got another corridor with another major channel of aid for the international community.
Are the airdrops continuing? I know there was some controversy about
the
that.
The airdrops are continuing, but the airdrops are an inefficient, high-cost way to deliver relatively little assistance. They're important in the absence of anything else, and I don't want to diminish that in any way. But when volume delivery of assistance from land corridors, from the maritime corridors, come in at scale, what we call flooding the zone, those airdrops won't be necessary.
And is someone donating trucks? Where are the trucks going to come from that you're going to need? And the drivers, by the way?
We have identified, the international community, UN, have identified a significant number of trucks, some of which are ready to enter now, are contracted for. Others are in final stage of contracting. They're all paid for. They're not free. We have encouraged, as a global outreach campaign, donations of trucks, movement as rapidly as possible into Egypt, Jordan, Israel, so that we can get more trucks in. But right now, these are all contracted or purchased trucks.
David, can you also just, before I turn it back to Daniel, just say a couple of words about your relationship with COGAT, the Israeli government agency that is responsible for humanitarian aid and administration?
Jason, if that they have not charged me rent in their facility is only a mark of their generosity of spirit and perhaps decision that they couldn't get it from me if they asked. They are our constant day and night interlocutors. They are absolutely, not just for me, but for the international community, the humanitarian community, the UN, all the states which are involved with them. We could not do what we have been able to, couldn't have achieved the progress that we've seen without the engagement of COGAT. And look, this is a mission COGAT never contemplated. Their role historically has been quite different. They took this on because they had to. And they have done an exceptional job under extremely challenging and difficult circumstances. Remember, they don't command any troops, but yet they have to make sure troops do the right thing.
Yeah, providing aid while the war is going on.
Yep.
And while their soldiers are in harm's way. Daniel, other questions?
Yeah, I think we have time for a couple more. The next one from Jeff Stone. Can you discuss the plans for the day after long-term humanitarian assistance and how that will intersect with the governmental structure that might emerge in Gaza if and when active hostilities come to an end?
It's a great question. When I'm asked that by any interlocutors, I explain my mission, my role is to try to help make sure there is a satisfactory day before for the others who are working on the day after to have a chance to succeed. Absolutely, there is a need for humanitarian stabilization of the situation in Gaza as an existential condition antecedent to any security stabilization, political, administrative next steps in Gaza. That's my focus. We got to get there for anybody else to have a chance of succeeding. In just very broad terms, we believe there needs to be, as part of any day after, a stabilization of the security as well as the administrative situation in Gaza, and then looking beyond and informing from day one that effort at stabilization. There needs to be a commitment to a political horizon, and our government has been very explicit about what that political horizon has to be, and it's 2 states.
Thank you. And
All right, could be our next conversation, David.
one final question here, and I would say out of the approximately 200 questions that we received, many people are asking about the hostages. So I want to end on a question about the hostages. The original and ongoing humanitarian issue here is with the hostages, and we know the U.S. is working to do everything it can for the hostages, but more must be done. How is the U.S. helping to ensure that other countries and organizations are doing everything they can to pressure Hamas to release the hostages? And wouldn't solving that issue have a critical domino effect that affects this entire conversation?
I'll go to the last part of the question first. We have said on many occasions, including within the last 24 hours, that a hostage release, which we are working tirelessly to see achieved, a hostage release will bring with it a ceasefire. The ceasefire will facilitate greatly the ability to deliver, move, facilitate humanitarian assistance and the kinds of measures, medical, infrastructure related, that are so much needed here. But we've been very clear. Hostage release is the condition for a ceasefire. Do I believe it will happen? Jake Sullivan just spoke at the podium yesterday and said, we believe this is achievable, but it is in the hands of Hamas. Responsibility or blame lie exclusively with them for the fact that there is not a hostage release and is not a ceasefire.
David, once again, you have been generous with your time and your insights, and I and my AJC colleagues are really grateful for your decades of service to the United States and to regional peace and security, and look forward to continuing this conversation in the future. Thank you again for updating us and for briefing the American Jewish Committee today's call.
And Jason, thank you for the extraordinary work which AJC has done and continues to do in the U.S., around the world, for goals we all share. Thank you all.
Thank you, David. Until next time.
Until next time.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for taking part in today's Advocacy Anywhere program. And thank you to our global audience for tuning in. To stay up to date on the evolving situation, make sure to follow AJC on social media at AJC Global, and you can find more resources and ways to take action at ajc.org/Israel-Hamas-war. Again, that's ajc.org/Israel-Hamas-war. Our hearts are in Israel today and every day, and Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.